Não é tempo técnico, mas é intervalo aqui no podcast. Já imaginou se seu time tivesse um seguro para não perder nunca? Pois é, isso não existe. Mas com a Zurich Seguros, quem não perde nunca é você. Na Zurich Seguros, os planos se adequam às suas necessidades em qualquer momento da sua vida. Seja seguro de auto, residência, vida e muito mais. Diferente de alguns times, na Zurich Seguros você pode confiar. Para saber mais, acesse zurich.com.br ou consulte seu corretor.
Sair da escola já com uma formação profissional no currículo? Parece bom demais pra ser verdade, né? Pois é. No ensino técnico do Senac, isso é possível. É ensino médio junto com formação técnica, que acontece durante os 3 anos. Lá, eles usam metodologia para projetos, desenvolvendo competências como resolução de problemas, pensamento crítico e colaboração, além de valores éticos e sustentáveis. Quer saber? Senac. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino médio e saiba mais.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We are breaking down the playoff final rankings, bowl games, all that jazz. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Apple, Google, Spotify. Not Google. They stopped doing podcasts. YouTube. There we go. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Leave a 5-star review. Make sure you leave a comment, drop a like, leave a follow, all those things. I know you guys, this is coming out Thursday morning. My guess is you already have heard lots of thoughts from many experts about the playoff, about rankings, about all those things. So I recognize that my thoughts are coming a little bit after the fact. But I also feel like I have a unique perspective because I think what a lot of people have been doing has been ripping apart the playoff reaction, or the playoff, the selection process, and even those of us who are, maybe rejoicing over Alabama's exclusion. I think we're all saying, yeah, this is kind of a jacked up process. I'm here to tell you that I thought the committee did the best job they could with the parameters they've been given. And I actually only have one slight issue, which I think is an issue that everybody's talking about, which is automatic buys rather than just automatic bids. That being said, I actually thought the committee did a phenomenal job. And I want to talk about that first, and then I want to talk about the things I thought they got right. And then I want to talk about the things that people are criticizing and why I think that's wrong. And then I want to talk about the matchups in themselves, at least from a bird's eye view. I will actually make picks on this show next week. And then the following week, I'll recap those and do the bowl games, pick the bowl games, and then I'll recap bowl games and then do the next round the following week on Tuesday. So Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve day, make sure you tune in here on the Big Ten Football Talk podcast for picks and reactions and all that jazz. So I want to talk about the rankings. I thought they did a really good job. And I think the main reason why is I thought for the first time in a while, they were consistent. Now, you can say what you want about different issues. And there are issues, right? Like people were bringing up the idea that SMU being above BYU was wrong now that SMU has 2 losses and BYU beat them. But here's I think what the committee decided to do before championship weekend. And basically it was unless you lose by like 5 touchdowns, we're not going to penalize you for having a loss in a conference championship game, which I thought was fair. And they did it with Texas. They did it with Penn State. They did it with SMU. And so everybody's looking at SMU and saying, you've got 2 losses. Why is BYU not above you? And why does Alabama's schedule not matter more? And I think what the committee did was they said, we're not really looking at SMU with 2 losses. We're not really looking at Penn State with 2 losses. We're not really looking at Texas with 2 losses. We're looking at them with 1 apiece. And then we have an extra data point that says, yeah, all those teams were pretty even with their counterparts in the conference championship game. They put themselves out there. We're not going to penalize them for it. So really, as you look at it, even though the record says 11-2 for Texas, 11-2 for Penn State, and 11-2 for SMU, we're really kind of only looking at it as kind of like half a loss, if that. And so, Texas went down a notch, but only one. Penn State only went down a notch, and SMU only went down a notch. And I think they went down 2 because I think they were 8th, and then they went below Indiana and Boise. I thought that was fair. I thought it was consistent. And so people saying, again, comparing BYU to SMU with head-to-head, I think the reality is they weren't looking at it that way. Now, do BYU fans have a legitimate gripe? Sure. But I'm gonna offer the same thing that I'm gonna offer to Alabama, to Miami, to Ole Miss, and quite frankly to SMU is don't lose the games that you need to win. Listen, if you want to be in the playoff, you got to win your conference. Like you want to guarantee your shot, win your conference. Particularly if you're a Power 4 team. If you're a Group of 5 team, you're at the whim of what the committee thinks of you. But Boise kind of left no doubt. They were the only Group of 5 team that I think had 1 loss. They won their conference. Good for them, right? Army's the one exception, but they got blown off the field against Notre Dame, whereas Boise was within 3 points. So, again, you want to be in, you have an automatic way in. So I don't want to hear about your complaining, especially when you lose multiple games. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. So that's, I thought that was a good decision. They were consistent. They said they weren't going to move anybody. I know Ohio State fans have some beef because they're like, why are we not above Penn State? Why are we not above Texas when we have better wins? And, at least with Penn State, a better loss being at Oregon versus neutral site against Oregon. And I'll just say the same thing. They chose not to look at the loss in Indy as a full loss for Penn State. They said they were 11-1. We had them higher. They're going to stay higher. Same thing with Texas. So I don't have a problem with how they scheduled this. I don't. So I think my, the maybe the only issue, and I don't even know if it's an issue, I almost would have put Arizona State above Boise because I think Arizona State has played has played better, and I thought they were more dominant in the Big 12 championship game. They have better wins. But ultimately, I don't feel sad for any of this. Now let me talk about Oregon real quick because a lot of people were upset about Oregon and their pathway versus other teams, particularly like Georgia, and particularly like Texas, right? Everybody's out, saying, "Oh, Oregon doesn't have an easy path as the 1 seed. They have a right to be upset." I think Joel Klatt has been adamant about that. Listen, if this goes chalk, like I think we're expecting it to, with Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, and Texas in those 5 through 8 seeds, like I think Oregon would like to play Ohio State again, judging from how Ohio State played against Michigan. They're injured on the offensive line. Oregon has confidence that they can beat Ohio State. And I don't know, like, out of all the teams that they could play, I don't know, like right now, Notre Dame is the hottest team in the country. I thought Penn State played Oregon really well and showed that they've upgraded a bit offensively over the past few weeks. And Texas is Texas. Like Texas is good. So I I get what people are saying. Like, do you see that Oregon could play Ohio State or Tennessee? Ohio State's maybe the most talented team, and Tennessee is a good enough team to win it all. Yeah, like that's the reality of a 12-team playoff, right? I think people are reacting more to the potential of upsets and that pathway versus the actual, like the actual likelihood. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word there for a minute. But like, so if Oregon has to go Ohio State and then Texas and then Georgia, yeah, that's brutal. That's brutal. But you know what? Like, out of all the 4 seeds, Georgia would have to go. Let's see, they'd have to play the 6 seed, I think. No, they'd have to play the 7 seed, which is Notre Dame, and then they have to play the 3 seed. Or they, if they play the 3 seed, it's Boise. If they play the 6 seed, it's Penn State. Like that's not easy. Boise has to play a tough road. Like every top seed has a tough road, and people talking about Texas and Penn State. Like yes, they have an easier first 2 rounds, but like it's gonna get harder. Like so, I just don't see all the hand wringing. I think the one tweak you make is you get rid of the automatic buys, and you at this point Texas and Penn State are your other 2 buys, and the Boise and SMU are relegated to being in the first round. I think that probably makes more sense, but I don't think it's this big, frustration. It's a difference between 2 hard games versus 3. And even then, you're assuming that SMU and Boise are going to be hard games. Listen, Boise took Oregon to the limit. Like we think Oregon's the best team in the country. So like Boise's, don't be surprised if Boise's in the semis. Right? And that's not a shot at Penn State. I'm picking Penn State most likely to not just get past SMU, but to beat Boise. But like Boise is a Heisman contender. They have a good offensive line. If they catch you on a bad day, look out, man. And their head coach, they're excited. They want to shock the world. So all this hand wringing about, oh, Oregon got a bad draw. Did anyone really get a good draw besides Penn State and Texas? By the way, like everybody's talking about Texas being great. Are we sure they're getting past Clemson? Like, I don't think Clemson's great, but like, put them in a playoff game with Dabo Sweeney coaching. They're riding high with momentum because of the win against SMU. Like, are we sure that Texas is going to win that game? Texas has not exactly looked fantastic over the past few weeks, right? Like they struggled against Georgia offensively. They struggled. They scored 17 against Texas A&M. They struggled against Arkansas. They struggled against Vandy. Like, are we so sure that they're going to be great? They don't have the best running game. They don't have great running backs. They don't have elite receivers. Again, they're good. If they put in Arch Manning, sure. But like, I just think the hand wringing is a little. I think people are freaking out about Oregon because, and I think this is my theory here. They look at the talent that they might have to play, and they're like, oh boy, Oregon was done no favors. But listen, and this is part of the beauty of a playoff and not an invitational. A playoff looks at what you have done and ranks you based on what you have accomplished, not based on who you think would win on a neutral field. And so if you really want to get upset about who Oregon has to play, get upset at Ohio State. Because the reality is, yes, they have the most talent, but they lost a second game to a team that honestly they had no business losing to because Ryan Day can't coach. No, I'm not still bitter about Ryan Day. And that being said, like, you penalize Ohio State for that. You penalize Tennessee for losing to Arkansas, right? If Tennessee doesn't lose to Arkansas, you're not playing Tennessee at the 9 seed. They're going to be a 6 or 7 seed, right? They're going to be above teams like Notre Dame and like all that. So I don't have a problem with how teams were seeded, and I don't have a problem with who Oregon drew. But I do think that at the end of the day, getting rid of the automatic buys is probably going to be the right thing to do. I don't think it's going to matter at the end of the day because I think they're going to expand to 14. I think the top 2 teams are going to get a buy, and then everybody else is going to have to play each other. But listen, I think Oregon's the best team in the country, and I think they're better than all the teams in front of them. So, and that's besides the point. Like, I think I am concerned about their defensive depth at defensive tackle, but I just don't know who's going to stop their offense. Like, I think Georgia's defense is really good. I also think Texas, I think Georgia can get got offensively. I think we saw that against Georgia Tech. I think we saw that against Alabama. I think we saw that against several other teams this year, against Ole Miss. Like, they're not an elite defense. They're a very, very good defense. Texas is a very, very good defense. I don't think they're elite by any means, right? So, and just as a reminder, Texas has not really played a good offense this year. So, yeah, like, is their defense really, really good? Yeah. Have they played an elite offense? No. So I just think Oregon fans, if you look at your draw and you're like, we got screwed. I don't think you got screwed. I think you have to play some tough teams. But I think you can win them all. So that's my thought. I want to get real quick. This is the Big Ten Football Talk podcast, but I want to talk about Alabama SMU for a minute. And I want to talk about Miami as well, because I think Miami has a legitimate shot, like legitimate beef at 10-2 being left out. I understand that. But I'm just to a point where I don't care. Like, everybody is mad, and Alabama particularly is mad because they're saying you don't honor strength of schedule. I'm here to tell you, yes, they do. This whole thing about we're just not going to play non-conference games anymore. Okay. People are gaslighting you. And I say this, I love people like college football nerds. I love people like Josh Pate. But this idea that we're not understanding the argument that strength of schedule matters and that they're mitigating risk by non-conference scheduling, you're wrong. Because I'm here to tell you, strength of schedule mattered. And it will continue to matter. And now here comes everybody saying strength of schedule didn't matter. Okay. Why would you consider a 3-loss team over a 1-loss team? That's my dog in the back, by the way, if you can hear her. But why would you consider a 3-loss team over a 1-loss team? Because of strength of schedule, right? Alabama had a great strength of schedule. You would put Alabama in over SMU if Alabama only had 2 losses. You want to know how I know that? Because Tennessee's in, Ohio State's in. They were above SMU. They valued their wins. They have them above Indiana. They have them above. They had them above Notre Dame before they lost, right? That's how I know that. At some point, your losses have to matter. And so people saying, well, they care about who they lost to rather than than who they beat. No, they cared that you lost 3 times. That has to matter. At some point, wins and losses have to matter in a playoff. And so this stupidity where it's like, well, it's not fair that SMU got in because they didn't play anybody. Okay, sure. Don't lose to Vandy. Don't lose to Oklahoma. Right? And people are saying, well, Oklahoma would have been a good team in a good conference. Okay. Can we just stop the nonsense for a minute? Yes, they played a lot of ranked teams. They played a really tough strength of schedule. All right. Oklahoma lost by 10 to Tennessee. They beat Houston, by the way, by 4. That a really, really great Houston team that's not going to a bowl game. At least I don't think they're going to a bowl game. Let me just fact check no, they're not going. They were 4-8. Beat them by 4 points. Okay? They lost by 10 to South Carolina. Or no, by 10 to Tennessee. They lost to they beat Auburn by 6. World beaters, Auburn, right? Lost by 31 to Texas. Lost by 26 to South Carolina at home. Lost by 12 to Ole Miss. Got beat by Missouri. And then got beat by 20 by LSU. So it's not just that they lost 6 games. They got drubbed in most of them. And they only beat Houston by 4 points at home. Like, this is, you really want to go there? Vandy being a good team. Do I have to bring up again? They lost to Georgia State, who won 1 game in the Sun Belt. And they beat Virginia Tech in overtime. Virginia Tech, I believe, was 6-6. Like, guys, your losses have to matter. And so, yes, do I think SMU would beat Alabama on a neutral field? Probably not. I don't think so. But you know what? You cannot judge a playoff system on hypotheticals, which is what the SEC wants to keep doing. And so, do I think that Indiana would beat Alabama? Probably not. But you know what? Indiana had the schedule in front of them and went 11-1. You got to honor that. Alabama, if you want to get in the playoff, here's what you do. Beat 6-6 teams. Beat Vanderbilt. Beat Oklahoma. Right? Like that's who you got to beat. And before people say, well, but SMU and Indiana didn't do that. You know what? Guess what? They did. Like Indiana beat Michigan, who's 7-5 and ranked 21st in Sagarin. Right? Oklahoma's 28th.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira,
pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Enquanto você escuta seu podcast favorito, que tal dar uma olhada nos looks da Riachuelo para as festas de fim de ano? Brilhos, transparências, vestidos, conjuntos, temos tudo para todos os eventos. Aqui, toda festa começa com look.
Indiana beat their top 30 team on their schedule. I know Alabama has a lot more, but Alabama got beat by 3 scores. Like, at some point, stop pointing the finger and look at yourself. You guys are the worst Alabama team in 14 years? Like, not since 2010 have you lost 3 games in the regular season? Shut up. Do your job. Win games. You've had hard schedules before. The problem isn't that you didn't have a hard, or is not that the committee didn't look at your strength of schedule. The problem is that you lost games you shouldn't have. And the same argument goes to Ole Miss. The same argument goes to South Carolina. So all these teams would be like, well, we feel like, I don't care about your feelings. What I care about is you lost. Those games have to matter. And look, we could talk about conference strength all we want, but the reality of this system was always to get to guarantee more access to other teams. That's what creates parity. You know what? The committee did their job, and they said, you know what? We're going to rate strength of schedule to a point, but at some point, losses have to matter. They have to ding you. And so just because you think that Alabama could win the national championship with the talent on their roster does not matter. Did you win? Wins matter. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And, you know, and everybody's saying, well, strength of schedule doesn't matter. You know what? It does matter. Not, you know, going and scheduling teams, you know, what actually mattered for was SMU. SMU had a tough out-of-conference game against BYU, and they lost. But they still got in because that was their only regular season loss. So I don't know what to tell you, but if you're going to sit here and be like, well, they don't care about strength of schedule, you're objectively wrong. It just didn't matter. It didn't matter to the point where it would get you in when you have 3 losses. But it would have been a tiebreaker if you had 1 loss. It would have been a tiebreaker if you had 2. I have no doubt that Alabama would have been in over SMU if they only had 2 losses. And that would have been an advantage over SMU because SMU had 1. Alabama would have been over Indiana. I would almost bet Alabama would be hosting a playoff game if they just had 2 losses. But they didn't. They have 3. Like, sorry. But like, that's like, don't lose those games. Like, that's you had a very clear pathway to the playoff and you blew it. Right? You know, nobody is hand-wringing, you know, this is a different example, but no one is sorry for Ohio State that they missed the Big Ten championship game. Right? Everybody thinks that Ohio State has the most talented roster, and they would have preferred the Oregon-Ohio State rematch, although I thought the Penn State-Oregon game was great. And we'll talk about that real quick here in a minute. But Ohio State like didn't belong because they lost. Losses matter. Losses matter. You can't. And to the Bama fans, listen, Bama fans, I feel sad because it stinks to get left out. And like, I understand the frustration and anger. This diatribe that I'm giving is not towards you. It's to analysts who are crying on TV, like Nick Saban and Kirk Herbstreit, saying, oh, Alabama should be in. No, they shouldn't. Okay? A.J. McCarron, of all people, former Alabama quarterback, said the reason why they got left out is because they lost 3 games. If A.J. McCarron's saying that, maybe listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. So, I want to talk about the matchups real quick. And in that, we'll talk about the Oregon-Penn State game a bit. I think the matchups are very intriguing for the Big Ten. And I'm not going to pick games, but I am going to maybe talk about pathways and what I think is going to happen. I think obviously the biggest game and probably the highest rated game will be Tennessee at Ohio State. I think this is a game that will get a lot of hype, but my feel on it, if I'm just being honest, and maybe this is me being an Ohio State hater right now, I think Tennessee wins this by multiple scores. I think Ohio State, I think they want to generate confidence, right? Oh, we've moved past Michigan. We've moved past this. it's a bad matchup for Ohio State. Tennessee's got a really good defensive line. I think Tennessee's good in the trenches. And I just don't see Ohio State holding up well. So I think it'll be close early. I think Tennessee will pull away late. And I think Buckeye fans are going to be ready to can Ryan Day. Um, I think the Clemson-Texas matchup will be fun. I think if Texas struggles a bit offensively like they have, I think Clemson's got a real good shot to knock off the Longhorns. I think Clemson's defensive line is better than people give it credit for. Offensively, Cade Klubnik has struggled a bit, against higher rated defenses like South Carolina, like Georgia. But I would not be shocked with new life and with, a game-winning kick if Clemson upsets Texas. SMU, Penn State, I think Penn State's pathway is certainly the most favorable. And I think that bodes well for Penn State, but I would just encourage Penn State fans, don't look past SMU. They're a good football team. If you look at Sagarin, Penn State is 8th in Sagarin, SMU is 10th. And so SMU highly rate, is higher rated than you'd think. They're one notch below Tennessee in Sagarin rating. And so they the computers like SMU, and SMU's got a really good quarterback in Sellers. He's dynamic. Maybe aside from Dylan Gabriel, Jennings, not Sellers. Jennings he's a dynamic quarterback. He can run, he can throw. They have a good running attack. Brashard Smith, over 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns. This is an offense that can sting you, and maybe the most potent offense behind Oregon that Penn State's faced. And so it'll be at home, which is good for Penn State. But I think you got to be careful there. And then Indiana at Notre Dame. First of all, good by the Hoosiers to make the playoff. And what a story, like a battle for the Hoosier State. And I would probably favor Notre Dame to win this game. But I think if Indiana can limit Notre Dame running the ball, I think Indiana has a pathway to win. Like, I don't think this is going to be a raucous environment in favor of Notre Dame, because I think a lot of Indiana fans are going to go to this game. Like, it's right in their backyard, right? So they can travel up there. I think you'll see probably like a 70-30 split. So, like, it'll still be loud, but I don't think it'll be loud like Ohio Stadium was for Indiana. I think their efficiency might give Notre Dame I think Indiana will struggle at times because I think Notre Dame has a good defense. But I don't think Notre Dame's defense is as good as Michigan or Ohio State, at least on the D lines. And I think Indiana will find ways to get drives together. And I think Notre Dame, they're a little bit more one-dimensional. And I think Indiana can probably slow down that running attack enough. So I will right now, I would lean Notre Dame, but I would not be shocked if Kurt Cignetti pulls off the upset. I think Indiana has a good draw there. Now, if you go to the second round of the playoff, you would have the Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Eve. They would get the winner of SMU Penn State. I would, again, I think Penn State has the most favorable path, but don't count out Boise. I like, obviously, Ashton Jeanty is I think the best player in college football. I think you should win the Heisman. That's going to be a tough matchup for whoever gets them, SMU and Penn State. or Penn State. But I think Penn State most likely wins, and I'll talk about that why with the Big Ten championship in a minute. You have the Peach Bowl, and you have I would imagine Texas or Clemson against Arizona State. I am leaning towards picking Clemson in that game, but I think either way, watch out for Arizona State. Scatterbo, I thought showed some things at running back. Levitt at quarterback, really fine player. People forget that Levitt was out against Cincinnati, which is their kind of albatross loss. But Arizona State really playing well at a good time. You look at them, over the past several weeks, beat Kansas State at Kansas State by 10, beat BYU at home, went to Arizona and just murdered Arizona, which I know Arizona's not great, but murdered Arizona, and then murdered Iowa State, who's a pretty good team, right? They're playing some darn good football right now. And whoever gets them, whether it's Texas, whether it's Clemson, even Texas with their talent, just watch out. Watch out, man. I think they could do some business on you. I think they could make it a bit of a shootout, and I think that's a game that neither Clemson or Texas want to live in. So if there's any doubt that Arizona State or Boise can't make it into the semis, I think those are actually not favorable matchups, but I think those are matchups that Boise State and Arizona State can win. Rose Bowl, you get Tennessee or Ohio State against Oregon. As a Buckeye and a Big Ten fan, I hope it's Ohio State, Oregon in the Rose Bowl, but I think it's going to be Tennessee, Oregon. And then Georgia would take on either Notre Dame or Indiana. I think if you want Georgia to lose in that quarterfinal game, you're rooting for Notre Dame. Because I think Notre Dame can and would beat Georgia with their injuries right now. Carson Beck being out, question about the punter. I think that would be a favorable matchup. And not favorable. I still think Georgia is probably the better team, more talented team. But I think Notre Dame could pull that off. And with problems at quarterback, I would have concerns for Georgia in that game. I think Oregon's the best team in the country. I think they beat whoever they play in the Rose Bowl, and they would have the winner of Clemson. I'm picking Clemson over Arizona State. I'll go Arizona State in that game. I think Oregon wins that game and goes to the finals. And I think if it's Penn State, Notre Dame, I like Penn State. And then I would have Oregon, Penn State in the final, where I think Oregon probably wins the rematch. But, and this gets to my thought about the Big Ten championship game. I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, James Franklin, he just blows big games." And I'll just say this: I thought he did a really good job of letting Andy Kotelnicki be aggressive. And people were upset about the 2-point conversion call. People were upset about the deep ball at the end of the game that was intercepted. Oregon wanted to get into a shootout with Penn State because I think in their minds, they knew Penn State couldn't hang. And Penn State hung. They took every punch. They got down 28-10. And Penn State, they came back. They made some key stops when they needed to. There's a lot of possessions in this game. And I thought Penn State did a really good job of being aggressive when they have typically been conservative. And we saw that against Minnesota with the fake punt and with the 4th down calls. And listen, sometimes when you're not used to being aggressive, you overdo it because you get so much into your head, like, I got to be aggressive. I got to be aggressive. I got to be aggressive. And you do that to your detriment. And I think that's what happened a couple times, right? Like 2nd and 1, you go deep and you're like, we just got to go for it. It's like, get the first down and then reset. Get the first down, reset. 2-point conversion. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe, we fight for, for a tie. Get the ball back and then try to tie it in the next possession. But I can understand it. And I'm not going to criticize a coach who has been talked about as being way too conservative. And then all of a sudden he's trying to shift. I didn't think it was totally unreasonable, right? If they get the 2-point conversion and it's, a 6-point game, 6-point game instead of a 8-point game, you're trying to win in regulation at that point. And I think, listen, I don't love it, but it's not like they were down they were down 2 possessions at that point. Sure, they had to go for 2 the next time, but if you get it 50% of the time and you get it the first time, great. So like, I think from an analytics perspective, Doug Maurice had said something very similar to that. And I thought it was helpful to think about it that way. And if you're an underdog and you're playing to win, and I thought he was playing to win. So did I love the call? No. But I thought it was an exciting game. I thought Drew Aller, despite his stat line, played really well. Made some killer throws that were not good, right? Like the interception that I think ultimately did Penn State in. That was a bad throw. But he kept fighting. And I think that's the takeaway that I had from that game was Penn State fought when they were down 3 scores. And they came back. I think they made it 28-24 at the end of, or at the beginning of the second half in the third quarter. And they were not going to go away. And I thought Oregon put them away several times, and Penn State said, nope, we're not going away. And I think you've got to give a lot of credit to Penn State for that, because Oregon is the type of team that if they get up on you by 18, it's over. Like it's just, you're done, because their offense is too potent and they'll spiral on you, because then they force you to get into a game that you don't want to get into typically. Penn State does not want to get into a shootout, but they got into a shootout and they almost came back and tied it. And I think that's something that really encourages me. I thought receivers stepped up. I thought Harrison Wallace stepped up. Amari Evans stepped up. I know that the tight end Tyler Warren, he had a drop, but it didn't hurt him. It didn't hurt the team ultimately. I thought Tyler Warren played a good game. I thought Kotelnicki in general, particularly in the second half, I thought called a very good game. I thought he was a little too cute early. I think they were almost throwing too much. But I thought as they settled down and they said, hey, we're a physical team, and that can really get us going. I thought Katron Allen looked the best he's looked all season. I thought Nick Singleton continues to look healthy. This is a dangerous Penn State team going into the playoff. And that's why I would not be shocked if they're in the national championship game. I wouldn't be shocked if they won it. Because I think if they get Oregon in the final, like I think they're physical enough to hold up. And I think they can learn some lessons from this game to the point where, okay, we know we can stop Oregon when we need to. Let's not make the pivotal mistakes now. And let's be aggressive when it's smart. And I think that's what they did. So, or I think that's what they'll do. So what my takeaway at the end of this, I think Penn State, or I think the Big Ten, I should say, has 3 legitimate threats to win a national championship. And Indiana, I love you all. I think if Indiana beats Notre Dame, I don't think Georgia is the type of matchup that you can win. I think it's actually very similar to Ohio State. But I think Indiana can win their first round game and shut up a lot of the haters. I think they can win at Notre Dame. And I think they can put up a fight against Georgia. Because Georgia's not going to overwhelm you offensively, but they are going to overwhelm you just in the trenches. And I think that's where Indiana is probably going to be in a lot of trouble in both games, but I think especially if they would beat Notre Dame and get to Georgia. I think Penn State has a legitimate shot to get to the championship game and win. I think if Ohio State regroups, which I'm not counting on, but if Ohio State regroups, I think they're the best team in the country. Problem is, I don't think they're going to regroup. But if they do, they can absolutely beat any team that's put in front of them. And then I think Oregon is the best team in the country right now. So I think the Big Ten has 3 legitimate threats to win the national championship. And I think the SEC has 3 legitimate threats, which is all their teams. Like, I think Texas can win it. I know I said I think Clemson might beat Texas in the first round. The reality is, if Texas utilizes their talent, again, in the trenches, I think they could easily go all the way, right? If Texas can mitigate Clemson and then they get Arizona State, and then they'd probably meet Oregon. If they'd meet Oregon there, I think they could slow the game down and force Oregon into more of a grinded out type of game. I think they can win that. But again, I think Tennessee similarly, like, I think they're pretty strong in the line against the lines. I think they would have a legitimate shot to go all the way. And I think Georgia, even with the quarterback injury, I know I've been saying, oh, Georgia's not great. Georgia's not great. You have to remember, when you're talking about playoff seeding and access to the playoff, that's different than what you bring to the table in the actual playoff. And so I've been sitting here saying the SEC is not that good. The SEC is not that good. I'm saying that relative to everybody's saying they should get 5 or 6 bids. The reality is the SEC still has championship caliber teams. I think it's very possible that Georgia, Texas, or Georgia, Tennessee is the national championship game. And if that's the case, I'll congratulate them and I'll say, yeah, but the SEC is not that much better than the Big Ten. And I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway that I would say is that regardless of what happens in this first iteration of the 12-team playoff, I think we should celebrate that the Big Ten has a really good league that I think is close to, if not on par with the SEC. Now, I think the SEC has more top-tier teams than the Big Ten does. And I think the Big Ten has more mid-tier teams than the SEC does. And then they both have teams like Mississippi State and Kentucky and Purdue and Northwestern. So I think you have that. But I do think that the strength of each league, there's a relative strength to each league. I don't think the ACC, the Big 12, or the Mountain West has a playoff shot. Like, I don't think Clemson can go all the way. I don't think SMU can go all the way. I don't think Boise can go all the way. I will say, I think Notre Dame is the one, as an independent, has a legitimate shot. Arizona State, I think I think depth will catch up with them. So I think Notre Dame, I would say out of this field, there's 7 teams that I think that can win the whole thing, which is exciting because I think it's a wide open race. And I think it's very possible you see one of the double-digit seeds making a run. I think Clemson could. I think, Penn State, I was just gassing you up a little bit. I think Penn State could win the national championship. I think they could lose to SMU, which is the beauty of this tournament. It's the beauty of this playoff system, is that I think SMU could make a run. Imagine if they're in the semis. Imagine if they're in the semis against Notre Dame. Like, how great would that be? Not for Penn State fans, but like, how great would it be if Arizona State finds a way to squeak by Texas or Clemson, and we have a semifinal? Imagine these are the semifinals. You've got SMU and SMU or Boise against Notre Dame, and like Arizona State against Tennessee or against Oregon, right? Like, that's a very different system than what you would expect, or result than what you'd expect. And I think it would be great for college football. And if people say, if they end up in blowouts and you're like, oh, like, this is stupid. No, like, that's how it's supposed to be. You see that all the time in professional sports, right? Like, I still remember the year that Peyton Manning and the Broncos played the Seahawks, and everybody was everybody was could not believe the shellacking that the Broncos took from the Seahawks. I mean, they got murdered. But like, it still counted. It was still watched. People still cared about it. And so just because we get a TCU Georgia in the national championship, it doesn't mean that the playoff system failed. It means it worked. Because we got the two teams that deserve to be there in there, and the players will never forget that. And that's what matters. Real quick before I sign off, I said I'd talk about the bowl games for the Big Ten. I'll just say what they are, and then I'll give a quick impression. I'm not going to actually break them down yet. The Rate Bowl between Rutgers versus Kansas State and Phoenix. That's on Thursday, the 26th of December. I think that'll be a good litmus test for Rutgers. I don't know who all the opt-outs are yet, but I think that'll be a fun game. It'd be interesting to see how Kaliak Manis has progressed, I think, against a decent defense in Kansas State. We'll go down here. You have USC taking on Texas A&M. Interesting game, right? Again, we don't know all the transfers. We know obviously Miller Moss is transferring out, Bear Alexander transferring out for USC. Interesting to see what happens with A&M. And can USC do the unthinkable and win a second straight game against an SEC team in Las Vegas? Because this is the Las Vegas Bowl. And so that's at 10:30 p.m. on the 27th. That'll be a crazy, crazy game. On the 28th, you have Nebraska taking on Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl. It's the Bad Boy Mowers Pinstripe Bowl. I think Nebraska should win that one, get to 7-6. I think that'd be good. Although there's been some weird rumors about Raiola. I'm not going to get into it right now. And then on the 30th, we have Iowa playing Missouri in the Music City Bowl. Every fiber of my being wants to pick against Missouri because I think Missouri's been very mid this year. I think if Caleb Johnson doesn't play in this game, I think Iowa's in a world of hurt. I just think that's going to be a rough game for Iowa. I think similarly on the 31st, you have Alabama versus Michigan. I think Alabama has a lot. I think Alabama has a lot of people coming back. I think Michigan, there's a lot of enthusiasm around Michigan. I don't think a lot of your stars are going to play. I don't think Will Johnson's going to play. I don't think Mason Graham's going to play. I don't think Kevin Grant's going to play. I think it might be a bloodbath. I think it's going to be rough. Washington, Louisville, that will be interesting. I think I'd probably give a little bit of the edge to Louisville, but I could see Washington winning that game. Like, I think it's going to be a fun, entertaining game. That's the Sun Bowl, 2 p.m. on CBS. The Cheez-It Citrus Bowl on the 31st, South Carolina against Illinois. I would favor South Carolina in that game because of the strength of their defensive line. Pat Bryant's not playing in that game. That also concerns me. But I think if you get past the defensive line of South Carolina, I think if you can find ways to neutralize them, I think Illinois has answers. And I think their defense might make things hard for South Carolina's quarterback. I know a lot of people were excited about South Carolina at the end of the season. Lenora Sellers, both running and throwing, was really good. And, they beat Clemson. They, I thought played really well down the stretch. But remember, they struggled a bit against Missouri. They won 34-30. This is a good South Carolina team. They're not great. So I think Illinois has a real shot to win that game, but I would favor South Carolina again because of the strength of their lines. And then let's see. Did I miss any? I think I missed a couple. So that's on the 31st. And Minnesota takes on Virginia Tech. I think PJ Fleck's going to get a boat full of mayo for Christmas because I think Minnesota is going to torch Virginia Tech. I think Minnesota is a much better team than Virginia Tech. So I like Minnesota in that game. I think they get to 8 wins. But we will break those games down more in the coming weeks. But thanks for listening. Again, if you like the podcast, make sure to like, follow, subscribe. Also, go over to the Big Ten Huddle and subscribe there. We've been doing some great stuff over there, and I have an announcement in regards to the Big Ten Huddle coming soon. So until then, stay locked in over this bowl season. It's been really fun to bring this content to you all. Take care. God bless.